Now, I grew up in North Carolina, and I wouldn't say I had a stereotypical black mother, but I had a very typical black mother of the time. And so, the rule in the house was, you can party all Saturday night if you want to, but come Sunday morning, your behind better be in church. So I appreciate the effort it took for everybody to be here early this morning, so I'm glad you're here. I want to also begin with thanks like I have in the other mornings. Again, thank you to the Colorado Health Foundation staff for all that they've done to make this possible. Every year I say, I don't know how you're going to top this year. And every year they do. So let me just say it again. I don't know how you're going to top this year. I'm sure next year we will. Also, thank you to the folks from Sweet Spot who are our Livestream folks. Thank you to all the folks who've joined us on Livestream. Jeremy and the AV team here at the conference center are just awesome as always. The chefs, the servers, the banquet folks, the staff here at the conference center and the hotel are just outstanding. And we thank them very much. So yesterday was another good day. Both the morning panels I thought were excellent. One, the journalist panel came from more of a distant but passionate viewpoint. And then the providers came from a very up close and personal and passionate viewpoint. And then I think Matthew Desmond just, excuse the pun, brought it home when he just kind of encapsulated all that happens or doesn't happen for families when they can't have a safe and stable environment. And how once they don't have that environment, it just becomes some spiral that with their best efforts, it's hard to get out of. And just the story he was telling of that one family, the decisions and choices and trade-offs she had to make on a daily basis, continually for years, would cripple most of us if we had to make them for a week. So there is resiliency and there is an entrepreneurship amongst folks because they have to figure things out in a way that we never have to figure things out. And like you, I want to make it that they don't have to figure things out like that. I want them to figure out which Pop Warner football team or baseball team their kids should be on. I want them to figure out whether they should, buy their clothes from Target or from Macy's. That's what I want them to have to figure out. Not, where am I going to put my kid's head tonight? Not, is this the 5th school in a school year that my son has to go to? And his records never catch up to him. He's gone to the next place before the records get to the last place he left. So I think he just made it viscerally clear what it looks like for these families. And so there's one question that was asked 2 different ways this week in 2 completely different contexts that I continue to struggle with, and I know you all struggle with as well. So on Monday night, when we were having a very intense and vulnerable and personal discussion when we were having the interview with Matt Iglesias, one of the, I think it was a county commissioner from, I forget which county, from Grand County, that from a conservative county that stood up and said, the fear factor is real for people not wanting people of color in their neighborhood. And how do we get over that? How do we get beyond that? And then last night, the dance party, as you would expect, somewhere in the middle of the party, a kind of a modified conga line started. And so there's a few people, then there's a lot of people in the conga line. So when it came time for the conga line to like turn and start snaking through the room, instead of making a big wide turn, it made a very sharp turn, and it ended up that it turned on itself. And so we all just then we just started high-fiving each other as we went down the line. So we were looking each other in the eye, acknowledging each other, and high-fiving each other. And afterwards, I was having a conversation with a couple of community organizers, and I forget that I've forgotten their names. But the gist of the conversation was that happened so organically and was so affirming. How do we get that effect in communities? And how do we get that to happen across communities? And I certainly don't pretend to have have the answer to that, but I think I know a couple of elements of the answer. And one is that people shared a common experience. That happened to be a dance party, but it was a common experience we shared. So maybe it's the common experience in the community can be building a playground. Maybe it could be cleaning up a vacant lot. Maybe it could be a faith-based experience, but a common experience that brought people together on the one thing that they were all aligned with at the time. Then the second element was somebody just took the lead and started it. Somebody just took the initiative and said, let's do this. So how do we then start creating those common experiences in communities and across communities? And it's probably going to have to be us that starts it. You know that, right? Going to have to be us that start it. So I'm sure there are other elements to the answer that we can continue to figure out together and talk together, but it's work I think we have to continue and must continue doing. So that's kind of where I'm taking away from the last 2 days, and still we have more to do today. Now, speaking of the dance party, I always can judge how good the party was based on how jacked up my hair is the next day. It was a good party. It was a real good party. Y'all started the party even before the party started. The band that played during dinner was outstanding, so people were dancing already. And it was such a good party, I had way trouble deciding on the dance awards for last night. So there are actually multiple. That's how good it was. So here we go. In the junior division, the cute as a button dancers were Mac and Jade, who are children of 2 of our employees. So we will give their parents a $25 gift certificate to buy something special for your daughters. Then in the older junior division, got Daniela Garcia, whose mom I think is Nydia Vallejo. I don't know if she's here, but we'll find them. I know they're going to be here today. And then Henry Hilden, whose mother is Megan Hilden, I think. Henry is maybe 10, but he takes hip hop at his school, and boy, it showed. All right, so we'll congratulate them. In the adult division, oh my God, we had so many contenders. I couldn't even limit it to 3, so I have 8. 8, that's how much dancing there was going on. All right, so Kyle Johnson. Oh, let me back up. So for Daniela and Henry, we'll give them $100 gift certificates to help with back to school shopping. So Kyle Johnson, Monica Martinez, Jessica Dunbar. Is Jessica here? Aaron Miltzenberger, of course. Terry Richardson, Dr. Terry Richardson. Gina Peterson. See, they partied so much, they didn't get the Shirley McNeil rule. And Deb Demling. For all of them, we will make a $1,000 contribution to the nonprofit of their choice. And I had to make a special category for this next person. I'm going to call this the Little Engine That Could Award for someone that was, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. That's Dr. Don Murphy. $1,000 to his nonprofit of choice as well. And then on the staff side, Colorado Health Foundation staff, as tired as they were, showed up to party last night and enjoy each other. But there were a few standouts. Austin Montoya, Leslie Foe, Alexis Waitman, Sean Dollard, and Amy Duggan. They all get an extra day off. All right. So let's see. I think I got a slide here that shows what we're up to today. So this morning we're going to start with some storytelling. Then, as I told you on Wednesday, we had so many great exchange session proposals that we're going to do another round of exchange sessions. Then we'll end the morning with a keynote from Becky Margiotta. Did I pronounce her name correctly? I want to remind you that we will be sending you surveys after the symposium for your feedback. We take that very seriously and we use it to make next year's symposium better. Don't forget, right before we leave, we will draw 2 names for $10,000 donations to the nonprofit of your choice. So with the index card that's in your seat, write your name and your organization, and then there will be big bowls, I think. There are tables in the back with bowls. Put your name in that, and we'll draw that right before we leave. If you don't have cards, it's because you sat in the last 3 rows. So you have to come up closer and get one from up here. We were trying to encourage people to move up front, but plenty of cards around. So now to get the morning started, I'm going to invite up my colleague Jahan Benton-Clark, along with some folks from the Close to Home nonprofit, Jen McDonald and Marsha Brown, for some storytelling. Thanks.
Well, good morning. I'm gonna try that one more time. Good morning.
Good morning.
So we are so excited this morning as we move into our discussion around finding common ground and getting things done, to have with us 2 storytellers with Close to Home, which was really around shining a light around the experience of homelessness and mobilizing people to create sustainable solutions. And this morning, Jen McDonald and Marsha Brown have decided to share with us this opportunity to hear a little bit of their story as we really think about what it means to understand this intersection between health, housing, and inequities. So I invite all of us to take a moment to really listen to what they're going to share with us. Marsha?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I wanted to, first off, just let people know that my story may be different, but homelessness is the same for everyone. I come from Detroit. I came here in '03, and things are going great, actually. I worked at a credit bureau, and my kids were doing good. They were soaring in school. I mean, when you take that pulse and say how you're doing in life, things were going really, really well. I started a nonprofit, started working with that, really feeling my passion of giving back to the community. And then I decided to open up my business. While, you know, aspiring to be a business owner, you know, you dig in with both hands. How many of us run a business? Yeah, yeah, it's a few of us. Even if it's not our own, we run it. No, I'm just kidding. And so I was doing really well, right? My young man, I have 2 kids, I'm a single parent, and my daughter at the time was in middle school. No, I'm sorry, she was in high school. And my son was just finishing up his last year. He was out with some friends playing video games like, you know, most teenagers do. It just seemed like the pack of video game players, right? They go from house to house, get in the game, somebody got the better, whatever that thing is, and then they just go and you just throw food in the room and everybody is fine. You don't even know whose kids is in the house. You're like, hi, and they all call you mama, right? And so we're just like, okay, they're doing their regular thing. And this night, now they've gotten a little older, people are driving. That's a scary moment all by itself. How many parents do I have in the audience? Yeah, okay, yeah, even if you have furry kids or you're a parent. And I got that phone call on a Friday night. My young man was not at home, and neither was my daughter. And it was that call with the 3 zeros behind it. And you're thinking, okay, where's people, right? You do this check. So my daughter was at her aunt's house. Yeah, okay. Answer the phone. It's a police officer from the hospital saying that my son was in a car accident. And you wait. But he's okay. And he goes on to say that the young lady did not make it. And so I was just froze. I suspect most parents is fearful to get that call on a Friday night, in the middle of the night. It's not raining, it's not snowing, it's a regular Friday night. And I've dreaded this for so long. So I get to the hospital, I'm not sure how, and my young man was, his elbow, he had a torn hip joint. He went from being martial artist, Muay Thai, all kind of karate and inspiring to have a healthy, energized life. This young man was fit to not being able to use his left arm. He really resembled one that had a stroke. Emotionally distraught. It was his girlfriend in the car with him that did not make it. And what do? As a parent, how do you help a situation you can't help? The only thing you could do is be there, right? And we shine for that moment. We say, hey, as parents, I want to be there for my kid. I wanted them to know how much I love them and I support them through it all. Day 4, he's released from the hospital. He's not able to walk good, barely able to walk, mentally and physically. And I have to make that critical decision. I shut my business down and became a full-time caregiver. Had no idea what that meant. We think it's, okay, changing Band-Aids and doing it. No, that is picking a young man up off of the floor that is emotionally not wanting to be here anymore. And understanding that there is a reason that we have to do this. 6 months later, I live out my savings. I am homeless. There's no more money. What do you do when you're homeless? Where do you go? And from that moment, my entire life changed. And I'll stop there because I probably didn't took up all of everybody's time. But I just want you to know that the work that everybody does that help people with housing, with health, is critical. The reason you show up every day, whether you want to or not, whether you get along with your coworker, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with people like me. And I stand up on the stage representing lots of people that you would not see. You would not see me on the corner. I wasn't on the corner. I was asleep in my car. I was looking for housing, and I finally found it. Yeah. So in what could be my introduction to homelessness was also my introduction to true resilience, true advocacy, listening with the intent to hear and not with the intent to respond.
Thank you so much, Marsha.
Absolutely.
Jen, as we continue to really listen, and as Marsha just said, with the intent to hear, we invite you to share your story with us as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. A lot of what Marsha said resonates within my story also. I don't think, and we talked about this last night, that anybody makes the conscious decision to experience homelessness. However, it happens, and it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't seek any specific sort of lifestyle or individual out. It is very unforgiving in that way. I moved out here, and I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I moved out here with my family in 2014 for a job. Back then I was in culinary working as a cook and had been offered a position out here. However, after selling all of my belongings, including our family vehicle, and riding the train out here, I found out that the position had been given to somebody else. So that left us in a pretty big pickle, right? We were told that we could come home, but home, where my family was, is in the country outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the job opportunities there are very slim to none. And we knew that if we went back, at the time I had a partner, that we would be putting a burden on my family. While we would be welcomed, we would be no better off than how we were when we landed in Colorado. So we made the conscious decision to dig deep and do whatever it took to stabilize ourselves. What was really surprising, two things really quick, was that we didn't realize how tight the housing market is out here, how incredibly competitive it is. And we had put a security deposit, first and last month's rent, down on a rental property, sight unseen. So when the position fell through, we decided to be honest with the landlord and let him know while we had the income to document on paper, we no longer had the income to sustain the rental property. And that was enough for him to disqualify us. And we had to forfeit our security deposits. That was not a small chunk of change, as I'm sure most in this room probably know. And we were also told that if we didn't have a plan of action and no family, that we needed to get to Denver. Denver was where the resources were. And so we took the last little bit of money that we had, and we were in Colorado Springs, and got on a bus and came to Denver. And we arrived in the middle of the night, didn't know the layout of the city, had no idea where to go, didn't even have enough money in our pocket for a hotel room that night, and ended up riding the light rail, thank goodness, warmth, for the majority of the evening before spending my first night in Denver sleeping in a laundromat. That was really eye-opening. It really, really made me ask myself, what choices have I made to lead me to here? Is this my fault? Or am I a product of unfortunate circumstances? Come to find out, there are a lot of people that look like me that are a product of circumstances that are outside of our control. Like I said, I don't believe that anybody intends to experience homelessness. I think it is something that definitely happens and like I said, doesn't discriminate. Fast forward, I accumulated every contact I could come up with, whether it be faith-based or food banks or individuals helping, and called and asked, what do I have to do? How do I qualify? And more times than not, I didn't qualify for one reason or another. And I quickly found out through larger organizations that I don't fit the criteria to receive immediate assistance, disability, mental health issues, criminal record. I was able-bodied, ready to work and do whatever it took to get myself out of the situation, and that was enough to be turned away. They said, we can't help you. You're one break away from being stable, but no one ever offered what that break looked like. No guidance how to find it. That was really breathtaking. I'm here practically begging with my family, saying, we need your help. And you're telling me that I am too close to being stabilized, that you have nothing. And that was really wild to me. It took an entire year before we found a program that helped our family stabilize. They gave us the tools to really think outside of just emergency housing and staying in that survival cycle. Because it is very true. You stay trying to make it 1 hour, 1 day, one night at a time, that it's hard to get out of that cycle if you're not given the resources and the tools to reset. And this program allowed us to do that. Helped me get enrolled in school. I am a veteran storyteller now with Miss Marcia, and I work for a fantastic foundation. And I am an independent single mother of 2 kids who are thriving in Denver, but I know that I wouldn't be sitting on this stage right now if all of the people in this room weren't doing and continue to do the work that they do.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. So one of the things we talked about last night is, in order to really listen and to ask folks to share, to give us the opportunity to hear, we knew we wouldn't be able to hear your entire stories, given the time that we have. But given the audience and who's watching us on the live stream, what advice would you have for them about really taking time to listen and to have people share their stories with them? What should they know?
Well, they should make space. It's hard to share a story if there isn't space made at, the tables where decisions are being made and where the conversation is shifting in a way that it can be felt. And I believe that because the space was made for me to share my story, that it allows me to hold the door open for the next person behind me.
Absolutely. I think with given the type of work, given that we're talking about human beings who are totally different in every facet of the rainbow, right? I think that opportunity to listen, be at the table with the decision makers, have a voice from someone that's on the ground and understands that real work. We can create policies and processes forever. But until you hear how someone like Jen spent a year, right, one step away from getting help. I was told when I walked into Warren Village that the wait list was 3 to 6 months. That's like telling someone you cannot get sound rest. Most people can't go a week, right? We're trying to figure out something to help us sleep better. But you can't get sound rest for 3 to 6 months. That's crazy. Sounds ludicrous. I'm a human being. I'm a person with children. And if there's some decisions to be made, please allow an opportunity for me to remain human. I don't have to fit in. See, I didn't abuse substance. I didn't have something else going on. My son was in a car accident. I lived out my savings and I became homeless. How can I get help? Other programs won't help me. To this day, I closed on my home October 2017 with the help from grants, from Denver Housing Authority, from self-sufficiency programs, from resident achievement programs, from completing skill sets at Warren Village, from taking on all of these little things. People, because they're homeless, do not have determination. Some people don't have a lot of resilience. So know that when I'm asking for help, if I look emotional, I still need your help. That's what I would like for folks to know. Ask me, and then create something for somebody like me.
Thank you all so much for sharing your stories with us. Again, we really thank you all for this opportunity for us to really listen, and we hope that everyone will continue to take what you just heard this morning as we move to the exchange sessions, which are outside of the doors. Really think about what it means to find common ground as we think about developing sustainable solutions.
Thank you, Matt Iglesias, for joining us. We've got a room full of folks, some of whom I think are avid followers of you on Twitter and Facebook and other social media spots. Let's start with just asking you about the Explained series. What was the purpose of starting the Explained series?
Trying to make money. No, you know, what we're trying to do with everything that we do at Vox is try to take digital media out of a mindset that says everything has to be faster, 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 and take advantage of another property that digital media has that we all know and love Netflix for, which is, you know, you can watch your favorite Friends episode like whenever, right? And so we wanted to think about but are topics where we could bring the skills of journalism to bear on creating evergreen stories that are relevant to the news, but are not ephemeral in the way that Bob Mueller did this in Congress today kind of thing is. And the racial wealth gap, is one of the kind of issues that exemplifies this approach. Things happen every day in the news that this history is the backdrop for. People are constantly arguing about issues that this is the backdrop for, and yet the basic facts, which are still not that well known, they don't change over time, right? You can watch this episode again a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. I mean, maybe we will solve this problem in a year, and then the episode will seem irrelevant. Cynically, that's probably not going to happen. So, journalistically, it becomes an enduring product that helps Netflix build its library of content and helps us build the world's library of knowledge.
So are you trying to just educate and inform, or are you trying to spur action, revolt? What was some of the agenda
Well,
behind
there you
it?
don't always agree. Netflix, throughout the production of the season, they're a great partner in so many ways. They wanted to shy away from sort of hard-edged, politics-y stuff. So this naturally raises the question, like, what do you do? The episode doesn't really get that deep into that kind of question. To me personally, I mean, I got into journalism because I believe that journalism matters. And it matters because it helps solve problems and helps drive change. I'm not an activist, I am a journalist, but I don't think it's worth talking about these kind of problems unless you're also going to talk about solutions.
So a couple of things from the video, and then we'll start talking about solutions. So what percentage of the U.S. do you think actually know these kinds of facts, like redlining, or folks weren't able to really access the GI Bill? What percentage do you think really know about it? And then what percentage you think it has anything to do with today?
I mean, I can't give you a number. What I will say is that I think that the younger cohort of college graduates knows this story. This is now something that is taught in American history curricula on a college level. But it was not taught even to me, and definitely isn't to older people. So it's a small share of the population. And we've seen, because these kind of issues have been discussed more and more in the media, more and more online, Ta-Nehisi Coates has helped popularize a lot of these ideas in his very sort of influential Atlantic essay. So it's become something that the kind of real thought leadership group of people knows about, but I think it clearly has not penetrated deeply into working class American consciousness or even just older people.
So that video covers, from slavery really up to now, but particularly kind of with the 2008. So I don't know if it was you or Mersa this morning that said you don't have to go back 200 years, you can just go back 10 years or 15 years. So what are the other things that you think have happened in the last 15, 20 years that are really still making the same, perpetuating the same issue, but they have new language? What are the new code words and the code language?
So, something that I think is important that we don't go into in this video is that one of the things that was done in the era of segregation is that you had formal segregation. But another thing that was done is that local communities were equipped with the general power to do exclusionary things. And the original purpose of that was racial exclusion. And if you look at when Baltimore adopted its first zoning code, that was in order to create and perpetuate a system of racial segregation. We dismantled a lot of the formal aspects of segregation in public services. We adopted fair housing laws, but we didn't withdraw those tools of exclusion from local communities. They are not used in the exact same way as they were used in the 1920s and 1930s, but the change has not been that dramatic either. You now have a world where, the story of the Booker family, that would probably not happen. If you happen to be a very wealthy African American, you could buy a house in a nice neighborhood. But neighborhoods adopt rules that make it impossible for people who aren't very wealthy to move in. The reason they do that has a lot to do with racial bias. And of course, for all these reasons, it's just the case that there aren't that many very wealthy African Americans. So you have a system of sort of formalized equality that in a practical sense can't be taken care of. There's a very brief clip in there of, I think, a young Jesse Jackson saying,
Right.
we have the right to attend any school in the country, but we can't afford the tuition. And that's very much the situation for a lot of American life.
So with like the local governments, I was talking to a man at the reception. He talked about his community, his city was going through rezoning. Now they have a policy that says we're going to be an inclusive community, but the actual zone plan just segregates the wealthy from the middle class from the poor. How do we influence local governments?
Yeah, this becomes difficult to talk about in a totally general way because the systems differ from city to city. But so Washington, D.C. is recently in a process of we are updating our comprehensive plan, right? Washington, D.C. was a Jim Crow city decades ago. It has stopped being that, but if you look at a racial population map, it's an incredibly segregated city. So you look what's in the language of the current comprehensive plan, and it will say things like, well, we are trying to protect stable neighborhoods from the encroachment of something. I forget exactly what it is. But it's the exact same euphemisms from a comprehensive plan from 1950. They took out the part where it says, what we mean is we don't want black people to move here. But those same, it still has the force of law. So you could say, okay, well, here's a planned unit development, and it's going to have X apartments. And then the neighbors can sue, and they can say, well, this is not protecting our stable neighborhood, right? So those are the kind of questions, right? Like stability, I guess it sounds good, right? But it's stability for whom, right? And if you're saying, well, we're going to have every rich, white neighborhood be stable, right? You're saying we want to perpetuate segregation, right? If there's going to be integration, the city has to be different from how it is. And that means that the language in these controlling legal documents, in these planning frameworks, has to call for change and has to be supportive of change.
So when you didn't hear the story I told this morning about my husband and I doing a social experiment, my husband's white, and buying a house and kind of being shown completely different properties. When we actually bought the house in Winston, we moved in 2 days before Halloween. So Halloween night, our kids are 8 and 5. It's this is going to be great. We can meet our neighbors as, the first weekend we're here. So we go up to this one house and we're walking up and I see the woman out front and, she's holding the bucket down and kids are grabbing handfuls of candy. Then my kids walk up and she takes the bucket and she hands each of them one piece of candy.
Yep.
And then as they're walking away, she turns around and says to, I'm assuming her husband inside the house, well, they're busing them up from across town now. Now, we lived 6 doors down. Luckily, my husband did not hear that. Or we would have probably had to move. But again, so there's the policy level, but then there's the individual neighbor that says, but that's jeopardizing my stability. That's jeopardizing, how do we influence neighborhoods?
You can't make people change what's in their hearts. It's good to try. But this is where policy does come in. And I think, to some extent, it has to, right? Because there's so much in life that you might wish your neighbors did differently, and you just can't change it, right? My neighbor put up a sign in his window that I thought was annoying, but it's not my business, right? But we empower homeowners to sort of pick who moves in and what kinds of building types come in. And then we have to ask, well, is that good? Does that accomplish anything useful? And the answer is it doesn't. It creates a lot of economic problems. It creates affordability crises in certain cities like Washington, like Denver, and it creates stagnation in other kinds of communities. And so on a technical level, my proposal is you have to move the decision-making authority further up. I think in terms of wealth more broadly, you have to redistribute wealth, right? In the movie, it discusses that in a reparations framework, which I think is very politically challenging. One thing that this movie does that I might do differently is it focuses very much on median to median, right? Which, so that means the person at the 50 percentile point. Another thing you could look at is mean or average wealth. And the gap there is even bigger, right? And the reason that gap is so big is that if you look at billionaires in America, if you look at the Forbes 400 list, there are, I think, 2 African American billionaires in the United States and several hundred white ones, right? So that's an incredible pool of wealth that is controlled almost all by white people, but is not benefiting the typical white family in the United States, right? So if you redistribute the wealth from the wealthiest people and you give it to everybody, that in effect does an incredible amount to close the racial gap, because a very large share of white wealth is held by a very small number of extremely wealthy white people, right? And so a politics that tries to stitch together lower middle class, working class interests against a, yes, incredibly undiverse group of super wealthy people seems probably more electorally promising to me than this sort of median versus median, middle class versus middle class kind of thing. There's a reasonable argument in theory for it, but people don't get helped in theory, people get helped in practice, and you have to come up with, I think these problems are fairly urgent, and people deserve solutions that are gonna fly.
So in the film, it talked about reparations being one of the, a radical solution.
Yeah.
What are other radical solutions?
Well, so something like I was saying, just wealth tax, right? Top end, confiscatory levels of taxation on large fortunes. This is an Elizabeth Warren proposal now kicking around that would do an enormous amount on that. I think on housing, to just really preempt local communities' zoning authority entirely, right? And go to the kind of framework that they have in Japan or in Canada, where these land use decisions are made by much more centralized government units. Say you can build apartment buildings everywhere, right? So that would be radical. I think some move to something like postal banking, to a public banking utility, so that you don't have this problem of unbanked people, which is primarily people of color who are, because if you have a bank account, if you have a savings account, right, your money makes more money for you. If you don't, if you're reliant on check cashing, if you're relying on prepaid debit cards, then you're doing the opposite. You are paying out of pocket for financial services, and so week after week, your accumulated wealth is kind of futzing away, right? And so that's not a directly racial issue. There are unbanked white people, but it has a large component because it's a follow-on legacy of formerly discriminatory policies that now you have very disproportionately people of color lacking access to the banking system. But there also that addresses needs of Latinos, things like that, right? That go beyond the narrow confines of the history, but address, I think, the issue there.
So in Colorado, this is a kind of a critique I would get on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. I would hear, well, Denver is only maybe 7% African American. The state of Colorado itself is only 2% African American. Why are we talking about this? Mm-hmm. How would you respond to those people?
Well, it depends what the context you're talking about is, right? It's okay, if you're running for governor, yeah, maybe you just don't. I don't know. Politics sucks. I think we talk about it in society because it's important, right? I mean, this is a very important thread of American history. And, you saw in this dust up from last week about, go back home, right? And this is a question of the sort of conditional citizenship of second-generation Arab Americans, of refugees from Somalia, of Puerto Ricans who are American citizens, but also of an African-American House member who grew up in Cincinnati and whose roots in this country probably predate, most white families in this country. And it speaks to a profound sense that goes back in the very origins of America, that only white people are the real citizens of the Republic, right? And that's a topic that applies now to many groups who aren't African American, but the origin of that, right? The origin of that white conception of the American Republic is fundamentally about the slave economy and its operations. And so I think, on an intellectual level, understanding these problems at their origins is very important. Politics, is a numbers game, and
So how-
sometimes important things get ignored.
So how real is the fear factor?
Mm-hmm.
The fear of black, brown, and red people. How
Mm-hmm.
real is that, and what's all that about? What are they afraid of?
What are they afraid of? So my son's in public school in a gentrifying neighborhood. It's a majority minority school, but more white families are going in. But people always talk. I don't know. There's apprehensions that are out there.
Oops.
And
Even Siri doesn't understand it. Siri doesn't get what everybody's afraid of.
Nobody ever quite wants to say what they mean, But fortunately, there was somebody I know who was a fairly recent immigrant from another country and not acculturated to American racial code language. And she said to me that she was going to take her son out of school in a year or two because she said, it's fine for preschool, but those kids, they listen to too much rap music, they wear bad clothes. I don't want my son to be friends with them, so we're going to go someplace else. And that is the issue, I think, on a housing and education type level. And then, on a political level, I think a lot of what's going on right now is just anxiety, not on an interpersonal level, but on the level of political power, right? That we have always had an understanding that the white vote would be electorally decisive. And we have now entered a period where that is not true, where, Barack Obama lost the white vote quite badly, but won an election anyway, right? And now, of course, he won many white votes too, and that valence matters, but it was a sea change in sort of how is the political system going to operate, and it's clearly threatening to a lot of people.
What is your reaction to Marisa's comment this morning that she doesn't think that there'll actually ever be a majority-minority because the majority will just expand who gets to be in the majority? How did you react to that?
Yeah, that's an interesting hypothesis. I don't have like an incredibly strong. Some people sometimes argue about this, like if we yell at each other loudly enough, like we're gonna see the future. It could definitely go that way. What is true is if you talk to demographers, they will tell you the majority-minority forecast by 2050, it involves the fact that a lot of people by 2050 will be half or a quarter Latino or Asian. Those are going to be very large growing demographic categories. And so the question of, so Keanu Reeves is a quarter Asian, right? And so there's going to be a lot more people like that. And it does seem to me that he sort of is white, right, in a sociocultural sense. So I think I think her hypothesis is a reasonable one, that in the future, a lot of people who the census is counting as mixed race are going to be seen as white, and possibly that will sort of maintain things. On the other hand, you never know, right? There was a famous thing in Texas in 1940, the legislature, they passed a resolution clarifying that Latinos are white, right? Because it was a subject of dispute there, and they were like, no, they're white, right? And now, though, in Texas, Latinos are not white. So it's not. People often tell the story of how the Irish became white, but that's not a one-way process, and it's not unambiguous. They had particular political reasons at that time in Texas for making that call. They were trying to shore up Jim Crow in a foreign policy context. It's all very complicated. We now have a politics of reaction that goes the other way and is, very exclusionary.
So how do we go about not blaming the victim in some of these scenarios? So like with subprime mortgages, you hear they should have known. They should have read what they signed. It's their own fault. How do we not blame the victim?
Yeah, I think this is just a kind of, particularly with financial products, right? There's a kind of utopianism in the idea that, well, we're just going to put this stuff out there and people are going to know what's good for them, right? And it's not true. Financial products are designed by experts. They are marketed by experts. The consumers of them are not experts. And so, of course, the experts have the upper hand, right? I think that's obvious. And you need to regulate these products. There is a domain of reasonable consumer choice where, people are going to have concerns about this, that, or the other thing. But it is, I think, true that regulators can look paternalistically at people and say, this is not in your interest. This is not going to be good for you. And we have to be comfortable with that. I mean, that was the idea behind the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Senator Warren will tell this whole anecdote, but it's like, long story short, like you can't sell an exploding toaster, right? And you can imagine a world where people say, it's like, well, if people want to buy the exploding toaster, that's their right. But you just can't. And so that was her idea, was like, you should not be allowed to sell financial products that will blow up in people's faces. I think that's a good idea. I wish the current governing regime wanted to enforce those rules. But it's important because, like, yes, it's true. You should read the fine print on everything you sign. You should learn how to do compound interest math. But like, we just know people don't, right?
Oops.
And I'm no different. I mean, I don't know if anybody here, like, have you ever gotten a mortgage? It's like
Yeah.
a huge stack of documents, right? And you're kind of trusting, you're like, well, there's a real estate agent here. I guess she knows what she's doing. I'll sign it.
So we talked a little bit how we changed the mindset of individuals and communities, but what about these large institutions? What's the role we expect banks to play in decreasing the wealth gap? What's the role we expect universities and the healthcare system and corporate? What's their role?
Yeah, I mean, banks, I think, is really important. This is mentioned in the film, but it's a small nuance, right? So after the crisis, they come, there's investigations, there's a discovery of fair housing violations. The banks are taken to court, and the banks agree to settlements, and the settlements have large monetary penalties. But there's no admission of guilt, right? So the priority in the Justice Department at that time was to get the money, get the cases done, get the headlines, and sort of flush the money back out to help people. But no admission of guilt. Because there's no admission of guilt, they are not in fact guilty, right, legally speaking. And in forward-moving legal processes, you can say, like, no, we didn't do anything. There were no fair housing violations. And that means there are no real ongoing consequences, right? Banks don't like to lose money, but they don't need, like, a bank doesn't need money in the bank. A bank needs the ability to make more money in the future. And so a settlement with no admission of liability means you don't lose your licenses to do anything. You're not impaired in your ability to make money in the future, so it doesn't create a real deterrent effect, right? And you need to come harder when you find these violations, because you need the banks to have a culture internally where somebody sees some of the stuff that was on this conference call and raises it and is like, hey guys, I know we can make money doing this, but if we get caught 5 years later, like, we're gonna be done. We're gonna lose our licenses. We're gonna be out of business forever. And that's the kind of thing that gets people to think, like, yeah, let's not do it, right? And it's not like they become nice people, but they build a corporate culture of compliance with fair housing rules, right? Whereas right now, it is not considered important to comply with fair housing rules. If you get a violation, you're going to lose some money. But if you're making a lot of money, then that's fine.
I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. So get ready for your role. So we talk a lot about the detrimental effects on the targets of exclusion. Are there, and what are the detrimental effects on the targets of inclusion? So all those people in the blue zone, what were the detrimental effects to them for being in the blue zone?
I think life in the blue zone is pretty good. In most cases. That said, I think that there is a long-term, if you look at some communities in America that, not so much Colorado, but which is growing and is dealing with problems of growth, right? You do have whole communities that are in decline. And if you look at some of the Midwestern states, right, you have a situation there where residential segregation became so intense in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Milwaukee, that the state politics became so hostile to the black inner city. There was so much disinvestment in that urban core. And for a little while, it seemed fine. It's like, well, we're in the blue zone. We're in the suburbs. There's no crime here. There's no schools here. But any metropolitan area, ultimately, lives or dies based on the strength of its core city, right? There's some suburbs are great, lots of people like to live in them, but the point is still to be a suburb of a great city, right? And when you lose that, when you have so much retreat and so much decision that we can just divorce ourselves from the problem of the core city, you ultimately have a cascading webs of collapse, right? And it has, I think, really hurt those states, those whole areas. It didn't hurt them in 1967, right? But the long-term process of separating yourself from social problems rather than solving them does tend to come back to bite you. There's only so far you can run. And so, when it comes to questions of public health, public service quality, are schools good? Do we have parks? Are the streets paved? There is a real long-term benefit to inclusion and problem solving rather than fear and flight in terms of building, the greatest, the most thriving cities in America are diverse cities. They are welcoming to immigrants. They are welcoming to outsiders who are coming in, and that requires a mindset of openness and inclusion. Not that it's by any means perfect in those places, but people are trying.
And so are those some of the cities you would hold up as doing a better job of being inclusive and the community really kind of getting it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to be too pie in the sky about life in New York or San Francisco or anything like that, but those are cities where you have diversity on the ground. Even as you have, pockets and patterns of segregation, you do have people living within the same municipal boundaries, using the same transportation systems, enrolled in the same public school systems, and grappling with difficult problems. Have they solved them? No, but they are trying. It is on the political agenda in these kinds of places. There is political power that rests in many different kinds of communities, whereas you have had these other American communities, we've had complete segregation across the lines of boundaries, inward collapse, and then subsequent waves. So a city like St. Louis has less than half of its peak population, and now the inner ring of suburbs around St. Louis are also going downhill, and that's really bad. It's not like everything's amazing elsewhere, but there are degrees, and there are places of hope and places of despair.
All right, let's see what questions you all have. And wait for a microphone if you have a question.
Oh boy, I got a microphone first. You scheduled this after the reception, and so thank you very much for today. I am County Commissioner Richard Chimino from Grand County, Colorado. At the county level, all elected officials have to run on a partisan basis, and so at the risk of having empty wine glasses and beer bottles thrown at me, I'm a registered Republican, an elected official, and I'm very happy to be here today. And I wish to highlight two things that you brought up in your conversation. Great dialogue, by the way. The thing I struggle with is I'm in a very conservative county, and I believe in facts and history. And two things that you touched on were fear, and I wish to try to highlight to all of my friends here. You might not know me yet, but we're going to be friends whether you want to or not.
Tell us.
We want to.
Fear.
Tell us.
I believe that. Fear, which is unjustified, and I believe not rational, is large. Okay, if I received your question, ma'am, I would say the fear in some segments is extreme, as unjustified and unrational as it may be. So the fear is huge, and I also want to say that the blaming of victims of about 300 years of history, the blaming of victims is very reflexive and natural among certain populations, and very, very strong and vocal. And so I just wanted to make those 2 points, and I guess maybe ask both of you to perhaps reflect upon, I just think this gathering, this is I don't know. I'm going to raise of hands, please. Are there any registered Republican voters that care to raise their hands in this room?
There are a couple.
There you go. Okay, one. Oh my, oh, so I just wish to say this is a bit of an echo chamber in and of itself. And so I wish to have you both reflect, please, how, if facts and history are valid and rational and real, how do we stop being our echo chambers, and how do we bring different tribes together to try to talk and understand each other better, please?
And what's your name? What's your first name?
Richard, Rich.
Rich.
So, you know, I don't think there's any like comprehensive solutions to these things, but I do think it's worth saying that if you're looking specifically at housing, you're looking specifically at housing segregation, that actually a very large share of the least segregated big cities are in conservative states, and in particular in Texas, and it's because of the power of like free market thinking in Texas state government, and they have really withdrawn cities' ability to use exclusionary zoning tactics there. Not, I think, in the pursuit of like like Greg Abbott and those guys, Rick Perry, they're not like super racial justice people, but they are super economic freedom people, who like want to say, look, like people should be able to build what they want to build. People should be able to move where they want to build. And it's not like, San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, these are not cities without problems. But there is much more integration, residential integration in those cities than you see in the liberal coastal cities. And it's because of that, I think it's actually a mix of a local politics, which is more liberal and more democratic, but also a state politics that's more Republican and more sort of markety, has actually produced a synthesis there that on a housing level works really well. And, reminds us, I don't know, to be lofty about it as Americans, there are a lot of good ideas out there. The world is complicated. People do solve problems by listening to other perspectives and stakeholders, and a lot of what we have in coastal cities is a result of a kind of progressive central planning mentality colliding with racial politics, and stepping back from some of that can actually help.
So Rich, the first thing I would tell you is if I had the answer to that question, I would be on some Greek island
Start a whole different
that I
foundation.
own. And maybe I would deign to have you and give you an audience. But certainly I would say it starts with kind of trying to overcome that fear and taking the courageous step of getting to know somebody and getting to know them at the human level. And you figure out, you know what? They got a crazy uncle too. They have trouble with their mother-in-law. Their kids are the center of their life. They coach football. We love the same baseball team, professional football team. And you start to find all those things you were afraid of don't exist. But I don't know what it takes for us to initiate that conversation with each other. Some other questions in the back.
I'm coming. Sorry, I don't want this to be a critique.
Stand up, please. if you don't
Sorry.
mind.
But to go along with what you just said and what you said earlier about life in the blue zone, I think part of what needs to change is that we need to stop saying that life in the blue zone is good. Mm-hmm. There are opioid problems in the blue zone. There are all kinds of domestic violence problems in the blue zone. There are all kinds of things that are going on that are hidden or basically hidden or downplayed because we need to perpetuate this notion that there are people to be afraid of because they're different and more dangerous. And then there's a good way to live, which looks like this. So I think one of the things that we can stop doing is stop talking about how precious life in the blue zone is, because it isn't.
There's some folks in the back. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to my homelands. Prior to occupation, this was called a Pacharia. Yo soy Tinede, Carlanes Apache. My family has been here in Colorado present since 700 AD. I'm a registered Republican in Park County, and I'm registered that way because I know who I have to vote for to get things done. And that's politics, and that's unfortunate. But I want to welcome you, and I also want to address your question. I'd like you to close your eyes. Put your hand on your heart. Take a deep breath. And feel your heartbeat. Whether you agree with me or not, whether I like that you're here or not, you're here. There are children and there are elders. And we have a responsibility since 700 AD to take care of each other. So if you did what I asked you to do, I just took you into my Apache family. 10,000 heads, including Mangus Coloradous, who the state is named for, my grandfather, sacrificed his life so that you could have a better life. So I'm asking you to help me. I don't care what your race is. I don't care if you're male or female, and I don't care if you agree with me or not. I just want you to know I see you as a human being unless you show me otherwise. So thank you for being here. Thank you for all of you dedicating your lives to taking care of Coloradoans, because I consider you all my people, whether I agree with you or not, whether you like me or not. So my question is for you. What is your accountable responsibility to understand that you occupy our lands? There are 242 of us left. We're going extinct. What is your responsibility to the children and to the elders? That is my question. You can answer that in your heart. I'll be here the whole conference. I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to make a difference. In the language of the Sikangu Lakota, because my language was taken. I love you. And even if you don't like me, you're here because somebody sacrificed to get you here. And I'm proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Jace, there's some folks in the back that had their hand up. Let's get a couple in from the back, and then I'll have just a last couple of questions for Matt.
One of the things I think has been powerful is the conversation recognizing what actually happened. And one of the echoes, I think, of that I see is that we still live in a system which is called capitalism. And in capitalism, the common understanding is that we need to strive to get ahead. And as we get ahead, there are winners and there are losers. And so as we get ahead, if I'm going to win, somebody has to lose. And I think we need to start to lose that concept that we have to have losers. And now we're starting to see different forms of corporations and different other legal doctrines where you can actually have a for-profit corporation that has a nonprofit mission. But I think our whole construct here is that somehow striving to get ahead and, speaking to some comments we've heard tonight about how some people don't know what to do. Well, it almost seems like if we're not careful under our form of economic governance, that people have to lose. And I think we need to lose that whole idea that in capitalism there are winners and losers, and it's okay. And those people who are losing, and even worse, those people who are losing deserve it.
Any more questions, comments? I see 1, 2, 3, and then we're gonna wrap up.
So thank you for the screening and the discussion and the incredibly loving comments. It gutted me, and I'm incredibly moved right now, and I don't know if I really want to ask my question, but it seems to me, and in order to tie some of the earlier discussions with the later discussions and some of these recent comments, I mean, first and foremost, our political economy, which is quote unquote capitalism, was built with wealth that was based on stolen land on the backs of stolen people. And that in and of itself, speaks to, I think, what was reflected in the screening here. The comment that I want to make is that one thing that I didn't hear discussed, Karen, when you asked Matt the question of why isn't this more well known, or why aren't these facts better understood by a majority of people? And I don't really know if it's a question of learning as opposed to a question of really violent, organized forgetting. And underlying that is this notion, this myth of meritocracy that I think perpetuates the fear that was discussed early on, this idea that I have what I have because I worked so hard for it, and anybody else that is getting that I perceive did not work as hard for that is somebody that I don't want around me or something like that. Mm-hmm. So the question really is, to that point, conceding meritocracy and sort of understanding the fact that at the root of the accumulated wealth, the richest nation that this world has ever seen, is that that bottom line, that wealth was built on stolen land, on the backs of stolen people. And it's the entire Jenga tower, right, just crumbles once you really understand that concept. And how do we get beyond that myth of meritocracy, that notion that that folks that have what they have today have it because they worked so hard to get it, as opposed to intergenerational wealth transfer, or luck, for instance, being born in the place where you were born, to the parents you were born to, whatever it is. It's a hard issue to grapple with, and I think that's a really foundational aspect of why this fear continues to be perpetuated. Because even the folks that I think are the most fearful are folks that have had, there's declines in these neighborhoods and communities, and as was mentioned earlier around, the opioid crisis or whatever. But it didn't start there, right? Because the opioids are a symptom. People want to be anesthetized because of other issues that are, producing despair in their lives. And that, to me, is rooted in this idea that we, have around how we get what we get today.
Well, you actually,
I'm
Brian,
stumbling over my words because I was so moved by the young lady up front.
you actually asked a question that I wanted to ask, but kind of ran out of time, which was about this, the myth of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because I did, and what are the other myths that are underlying this?
I mean, I think this is important, because the way I would say it, right, it's not that the people who think they worked hard for what they have didn't work hard. It's that a lot of other people also worked hard, right? It's hard to, an interesting thing I thought about on reviewing here is she talks about how, well, if you'd taken $100 and put it in the stock market in 1863, you'd have $3.5 million today, right? But she just shows, like, what's the median white wealth? It's not $3.5 million, right? And so actually almost nobody does that, right? Like, people nobody's perfect, right? They're not out there making perfect, flawless decisions with their finances. At the same time, like, everybody's working hard for what they've got. The problem is that the people who aren't getting money, like, they were also working hard, right? And in particular, if you think about it, right? I mean, if you're waiting tables, if you're driving trucks, that's harder work than, like, me with my typing and stuff like that. They're just not making as much money, because that's not how the economy does not give you money proportionate to the effort you put in or to the difficulty of the work that you do. It puts it in given, you can take an economics class, you find out why. But we too often treat the outcomes of market processes as ethical judgments on people, and then don't want to help the people who the market has frowned on, right? And I don't think that you're going to like address a concrete issue by saying, first we have to tear down the myth of meritocracy, right? But in a specific sense, it's like we are talking about we're all human beings, we all love our children, we're all working hard, we're all doing our best, but like what can we actually do to help people out? And there's a big tradition in the American welfare state of looking at people who are seen as deserving. A professor of mine wrote a book called Protecting Soldiers and Mothers, right? And it's about the extraordinary generosity that America showed at various times to communities of veterans, right? Because people understood, it's like nobody gets rich fighting a war, right? But that was seen as worthy service to the nation. And then the nation had to deliver in exchange, and it really worked, right? There wasn't some like market fundamentalist who's like, oh no, like we can't give money to that veteran. He should have been founding a business. What was he doing saving the country, right? Because like that's insane. Nobody thinks that. But it's taking a broader view of like who contributes to society and who belongs to society, and then you have a more generous view and you try to take care of people because we've never been a libertarian society really deep down, even though that rhetoric gets employed. What we have done is we've left people out of the circle of concern, and we need to broaden that.
And I think back to kind of Rich's comment and the thing about fear, because even if we talk about veterans, and if you ask people in general, what's one of the most patriotic things a person could do? And they would say service to the country. And then you say, well, what if I told you that African Americans volunteer for service at a rate of 6-to-1 to whites? Are African Americans the most patriotic race? Somehow then that gets turned to fear, turns people to, well, they just couldn't do anything else. So it's how do we stop letting the things, how do we stop letting people skew the truth? We've got time for one more question, and then I've got, somebody's been waiting over here. And
Let's just get an easy one though. Some of your questions are too hard.
I have an easy one for you to close.
Easy is a very vague definition. So I believe
Would you hold it up to your thing?
Is this better? I believe it was W.E.B. Du Bois that said that the system was not designed to protect those who it didn't include. And so my question, after listening to you all, as much as I appreciate your contribution and everything that you've done, my question is, where is the documentary? Where is the information? Where is the class that speaks to the very fundamental things that actually address the issues that we're having at a young age, at a young fundamental developmental level? So where is the class in high school that teaches how to balance your checkbook? Where is the one that teaches how to apply for a loan? Where is the one that teaches how to navigate credit? Where are those kind of classes for everybody, and specifically for those in minority and underprivileged and underserved communities? Those are the documentaries, those are the kind of things that I want to see, the ones that give solutions, not just let's discuss the problem. My thing is provide people solutions, because a lot of them don't even know that they don't know that they have a problem. They don't even know because they can't even pinpoint that there's something wrong. They've just been living this experience their entire life. So, when they're grown and they're having all these kinds of situations that are just constantly keeping them in their circumstance, they don't know any different because they just don't know. It's an unknown, to quote somebody that I don't even want to mention in this in this moment, okay? But it's real, and I know that I don't sound very corporate in the way that I'm speaking, but I hope that you understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
This is a problem that is not just something that is contingent upon your socioeconomic status. I think that this is something that is across the board, because this addresses women, this addresses minorities, this addresses everybody. Like, there is nothing in place to really, really support those kind of fundamental basic necessities. You know, instead they're teaching us gym.
Yeah.
And
Wait a minute, wait.
like, you know,
Gym
language
is still
arts.
good.
Gym is cool. Gym is
The
cool,
Health
but
Foundation, gym is still good.
don't make that contingent upon how I graduate from this high school. You know what I mean? Absolutely
So wait,
not.
now we're going to
You know
debate
what I'm-
gyms?
but I know you hear what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying.
I'm saying is, like, how do we address and how can we make those kind of, you know, programs and documentaries and situations where we're providing nothing but answers to these people, because so many people don't even know that they don't know what is going on. And if nothing else, to give and supply information for free instead of like, okay, for me personally, I didn't know that I didn't know until I went to college and paid thousands of dollars for my education, right? Like, up until that point, I thought I knew what was going on, and clearly I didn't, you know? And so, like, I feel like that's so much of the game in this country. You know, it's like they keep a check in place, so as long as you're willing to pay, then we'll tell you what's up. Otherwise, you don't get to know, and we'll just continue to keep you over there. And that's what's really messed up about it, you know? Like, as we all know, it's very, very specifically designed to keep those that they want to keep in that spot. And everybody that they think is okay to go up to that next level, maybe we'll inch you up that way if you can pay with interest, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So my question is, where is the support that is for free for everybody? Right? I mean, that's my question. And I don't mean any disrespect by that. I hope you know that I mean that with love, but I've never had the opportunity to ask somebody in y'all's position.
Sure.
Like, how do you address that, and how do you feel about that?
Okay, so a couple things on financial literacy. One is that I do think that idea has actually often been used as an excuse for underregulation, right? That people from the banking community will say, well, the real problem is we need to educate people, right? But then when you look, there have been different cities, different states have tried this, said, well, we're going to put into high schools, programs to teach people about this. We're going to have mandatory credit counseling for people who need to go to bankruptcy court for a Chapter 7 process. And the research on it is very unfavorable. It doesn't work. It doesn't help people. What does help people is general education. You know, and so when people go to schools that are good, when people are able to afford to go to college, that's the thing, schools that are good. Right. You know what I mean? No, I mean, I do know. A school that's rated as free, you know what I mean? Like, where right.
is their, like, baseline as far as, like, what their educational standards for life?
Yeah, I agree. But I'm saying in a policy context, I think another important thing to look at, right, that like regulators need to look at, because that they can frankly fix faster, is what are products that are only being used or primarily being used by people who don't understand them, right? Because this is something that you can measure, right? You can see studies between people. There are certain kinds of loan products that are basically only used by people who have weak math abilities, right? And they just shouldn't let those exist. Right? If there's something out there that we have reason to believe is only appealing to people who are being tricked, like, don't let it happen. Like, fraud is a thing, and you can't put all of the stress of everything in life on the individual in this kind of banking context. And it's been a real piece of malfeasance on the part of the financial industry to kick so much back to the individual, when what we need to do is, like, yes, we need to educate people, but also we need to give people access to basic user-safe financial services, and we need to get rid of very user-hostile ones and get out of a mindset that says, well, you know, if somebody can talk you into signing up for this, it must have been good for you, or it must be your fault that it was there, because nobody knows anything about everything. I mean, the wisdom of Don Rumsfeld, I think does apply there. Everybody has their blind spots, and like, this is the role in part of the government and of the community, is to just clamp down on fraudulent and deceptive practices.
So I want to agree with you and say that what you are suggesting is necessary but not sufficient. Because I think it's another form of blaming the victim, because it puts all the responsibility to fix it on you. And there are people who, once we tell you and we educate you on financial literacy, once we educate you on everything you need to know to kind of maneuver the system, if there's still a system in place that's designed to keep you out, and we don't put any responsibility on them to change that system, it's useless. So people know. People talk about poor folks and they should be eating better food. They know what food is healthy for their families. They know how to prepare it. But when they are making decisions on a daily basis of, I got $5 to get me through the day, how am I going to use it? And then I can go get 2 cheeseburgers for $1. I can feed my family for $2. But they've been systematically put in communities that even doesn't give them access to fresh food. So I think we let systems off the hook if we say we're going to accept the responsibility of educating ourselves. So when people say we've got communities with no voice, well, yeah, every community has a voice. They may have voices that are being ignored and voices being listened to. So if the solution is we need to help the community learn how to activate their voice, it takes all the responsibility off the people who are ignoring them. So I'm going to agree with you and say yes, and we have to do something else. Okay, Deidre is going to die if she can't get this question in, and then we're going to wrap up with one last question.
Very short, and it's actually not a question. It's for Rich.
Okay.
One thing that I know, and there's a short list of things I know. Given the echo chamber you mentioned, you were the best messenger within your echo chamber. And just think about that and lean into it when you have that opportunity.
All right.
Last question.
Okay.
So you're a journalist.
I am.
What's the role of journalism in creating this kind of social change in the social justice arena? So I told you it was an easy one to end with.
Journalism has many roles. I think it is important for journalism to tell the truth about these kinds of stories. That I think that particularly because a democratic political system is important. It's the best system out there, but it's not really, I think, a forum for education. People sometimes want it to be, but it's a forum for responsiveness to where people are now and what they want now and what they think now. And it is journalists who can afford to alienate people and can afford to say things that are unpopular or afford to say things that turn people off, but that have real power and through repetition and force over time break through and change how people are thinking. And at Vox, one of our main priorities, it's not about social justice, but it's about education. It's about how do we focus more of our efforts on the fundamentals and on the enduring truths and the big forces that shape our world rather than on the ephemera and the tweets and the fights of the day, right? Because I think fundamentally that is our obligation and our responsibility and our role in this is to bring into people's consciousness what is really going on, even when it's not convenient to talk about it.
And what do you think is happening or will continue to happen to mainstream media, particularly print media?
It's not great. This has been a very challenging environment for media for a number of different reasons. Print faces competition from digital, but in the digital domain, we face, what you do in media is you sell advertising, right? And we face very, very difficult competition from companies that aren't in journalism at all, right? So Facebook and Google and increasingly Amazon are great advertising platforms. And when your advertising dollars go to a news organization, you support news, right? When your advertising dollars go to Google, it supports web search, which is actually really useful and people learn a lot. When your advertising dollars go to Facebook, it supports, I mean, God knows what, like sharing of weird fake stories. I mean, I don't know, I don't want to get too deep into it, but I mean, that's something we need to think about as a society, because for a long time, we had journalism exist as a byproduct of the advertising industry. And I think we were glad as a society to have that journalism. And if we were instead going to get rid of that and have social media, I worry. I mean, I like it. I'm like not like a cranky old guy, but still, like we need reporters. We can't just all share things.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you all for hanging in with us. Thank you very much. It's great.
Thanks, guys.
About listening and solutions and really taking and stepping into their leadership role as we really think about how we work together and find common ground around these issues related to health inequities and housing. We're really excited to continue this conversation this morning as we close out the conference, really talking about the next step, right? Getting things done. And we are so excited to have with us this morning Becky Maggiata, who is with the Billions Institute. And most of you are probably familiar with her work around the 100,000 Homes campaign. She has been a great leader who has really been working with nonprofits and foundation executives around getting things done. So please help me welcome her to the stage so she can inspire us as we leave this morning.
Thank you, Jahan, and thank you to the whole team at the Colorado Health Foundation. It's really an honor for me to be with you here today. I think I'm the last thing between you and the raffle, so I also appreciate you being such a captive audience. I want to start by stipulating something that I know we can all agree on, that housing is healthcare. And you know this in your bones, and I know this in my bones too. So let's just start with putting that on the table. One of the people that I look up to most in the world is Dr. Jim O'Connell. He's a doctor out of Boston's Healthcare for the Homeless, and over 20 years ago, while he was doing street medicine, he realized that a lot of people that they were working with were dying way before, way premature mortality. So they commissioned a study to find out what was actually happening by looking at their health records, and they found out that 8 conditions, when they were associated with street homelessness, had this huge premature mortality effect on par with some forms of cancer. This is how Jim thought of it. If you can see this picture here, this is one of Jim's pictures. This is the wrong picture though. This should be, yeah, go back. There you go. Nope, keep going. This. So Dr. Jim O'Connell, he was like, if only I could write a prescription for housing for 30 days with 11 monthly refills, right? And he said, if only I could do that, right? So at the time I learned about this study, I was doing a housing first form of street outreach in New York City. And this was back in 2005, 2006. And a lot of research that gets done, let's just be honest, it sits on a shelf and gathers dust. But as soon as I met Jim and heard about his research, I knew immediately of the urgency and importance of what he was sharing, because me and my team, while we were working to get people out of the streets and into housing, bypassing New York City's shelter system, we were going to too many funerals too. So we took his research in those 8 conditions and we plugged it into our outreach protocols. And we systematically and methodically canvassed the streets of New York City, specifically Times Square at the time, asking people, do you have any of these conditions, and prioritizing them for housing based on if they had those conditions that would put them at a high risk for dying and how long they were out there. I saw with my own eyes what happens when you can prescribe housing, like Laura O'Day. It's the next slide, right? So you see the before, after, and then Ed Givens. Yeah, sorry, these are in the wrong order. So I don't know what happened here, I apologize. So if you go back one, that's Laura when I met her on the streets of New York City when I was doing street outreach, right? She had spent years and years on the streets and was battling with all kinds of addictions and health problems and health challenges. And then we were able to work with her to get into housing. And then the next slide should be Laura, right? And this was her after a couple weeks in housing, literally. And then I went back to visit her about a year later. I was going to the movie theater at the AMC in Times Square, and this is who was giving me my popcorn, was Laura O'Day, right? And so we know for sure, right? We know for sure that housing is healthcare. Then I went and worked on Skid Row in Los Angeles, and that's where I met Ed Givens, which is, with any luck, the next slide. Nope, the other way. Somehow this. I think if you hit refresh on the PowerPoint, if it's a Google Doc, that's going to be really helpful here. Because my slides are in a Google Doc, so yeah. Nope, that's Laura. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. That's my house. Nope, not that. Yeah, this is, I think someone must have downloaded an old slide set. So the Google Docs, never mind. Let's just take those slides off. Ed Givens, very, very similar situation, had 24 years on the streets of Skid Row. And like Laura, the transformation is immediate and astonishing. And I could show you hundreds more photographs like that. In fact, I could show you 105,000 more pictures to be exact. Our methods and tactics in Times Square became the foundation for what would become the 100,000 Homes campaign that I had the honor of leading from 2000 to 2014. And during those 4 years, me and my team worked with folks just like you in cities all over the country, 186 cities, to identify and house as quickly as possible people who had been living on the streets for a long time and had high risks for mortality. And over those 4 years, those cities moved 105,000 people straight off the streets and into housing. People who had otherwise been left to die anonymous and unknown on the streets. And so that was a huge, huge learning thing for me. And that campaign ended in 2014, but the work continues, right? And all of you continue to do that work in different ways. And one of the things that inspires me the most about the way that this work is continuing is the increasing clarity with we're putting a racial and social justice lens on the work. The issues that you have front and center on the agenda in this conference are exactly what we need to be talking about, and it's rare for them to be talking about in most conferences that I go to. So I want to honor that and really appreciate that and say that's not just about doing it or talking about it, it's about doing it, right? So I'm assuming you've learned a lot while you're here. I'm assuming you've met wonderful co-conspirators that you're going to continue to network with and do big things when you go home. I'm assuming you have a big to-do list of great ideas that you want to implement. I'm assuming maybe you met the love of your life at the conga line last night, right? I'll give you a pointer. This is why I'm married now to my wife. If you met somebody that you really liked last night, this is how I am now married, happily married 9 years. Text them and say, we should make out sometime. It worked for me. My work is done. My work is done here. All right. But the real question is, you've got all these great ideas, but what are you going to do about it? What are you actually going to do about it? And sometimes I find that people want some technical answer, some expertise answer, but they did a study of people at a leadership conference just like you all in the UK a couple years ago, and they asked them, what is holding up your big change efforts? And 12% of the respondents said it was something technical. 88% said it was something relational. And of those 88% who said it was something relational, 58% said there had been a relationship challenge at work that had been going on for 6 months or longer. Right? So this is very common, and I think this is the holdup. Right? So my company now, we train people who are doing large-scale change in the social sector, over 750 leaders. They come to me wanting the technical solutions, but what they really need are the interpersonal and relationship solutions. Because here's what happens. We're doing really complex stuff, especially when we're battling racism and all these different long-standing, historical, really horrible, ugly things. We need to be able to be nimble and be with complexity and be able to change our plans. There aren't any silver bullets. But what there are is stupid, you know how David Letterman talks about stupid pet tricks? There's stupid human tricks. There's a lot of stupid human tricks out there, and I am not exempt from that. I do stupid human tricks too, and that's the thing that stops us from when we go home being able to do the change we want to do. So what I want to put on the table as an antidote to the stupid human tricks that we all are guilty of is some basic principles and practices of transformational leadership. And what I mean by transformational leadership is leadership that literally transforms your followers into leaders themselves. Right? Leadership that transforms the world. Leadership that unleashes people to get big things done. Leadership that sets the conditions of orchestrating the loss of control of thousands of people you may never meet, moving in generally the right desired direction. The alternative really is transactional leadership. You do this, I'll give you that. Here's a carrot, here's a stick. And that grew out of factory models of command and control, and it's just no good for the types of things that we're up against right now, right? So it is with great humility that I offer you 8 provocations of things you can do as a leader to be more effective at transformation. 8 things you can do that will increase the likelihood that you'll bring out the very best of people and eliminate entirely the stupid human tricks, right? And so that you can realize the ambitions that you hatched this week. I was my own guinea pig in coming up with this list. Some of them are going to be from mistakes and failures of mine that I want to be really honest with you about so you don't make my mistakes. And some of these things are things I learned from some phenomenal leaders that I was lucky enough to be able to learn from and follow. So you'll hear their stories too. I know 8 is a lot. I don't expect you to memorize them. There won't be a quiz, but my hope is that 1 or 2 will resonate with you and you'll feel a little zing in your heart and you'll be like, this one's for me. Thank you, Becky. And I know that there will be some for other people. So you can write those down and be like, I need to tell Larry about number 6, you know, and make sure you pass that along, right? So are there any Larrys here today? We're going to pick on you a little bit. Okay, great. All right. So let's do this. Let's share these 8 practices of transformational leadership. So the first is transformational leaders are absolutely unwilling to micromanage. And this one is hard for the control freaks in the room, right? Is anybody else a recovering control freak like me? Okay, well, you're not alone, right? You're not alone. We've got to cut it out. It's demoralizing for our people. And people long for opportunities to grow and learn and try and make mistakes. And part of it is our responsibility as leaders is to give them the opportunity to fail. So I want to take you back to 1993. I was a first lieutenant in the United States Army stationed in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. It was rough duty. And I was in a signal officer, so we made sure that the whole division could communicate with one another. And I was in the systems control center. This was my job. And I was the junior officer on the team. So guess what that meant for me, the junior officer? Night shift, night shift. Some of you do night shift, right? So we tracked the whole network. There was maybe 20 nodes, and each node was a different unit that was communicating with one another. And we'd simulate as realistically as possible what we would do if we were to go to war. So we really tried to take this very seriously. And one night, we would track them on this board. And so we used, literally, this is magnetic dry erase board with green dots if the link was green, and red if the link was red. Right? So we would swap it out real time as the communications network was evolving. I'm sure now it's on an app or something very sophisticated. So one night around 2 a.m., we received our first notice that one of the links had gone down. So we went and we changed the link from green to red, and this happens, this is no big deal. Then we got the call about the next link. Then we got the call about the next link. So we're like just red, red, red. You know, my stomach turned. The whole network was going down in a catastrophic failure. And I know the military is different from the civilian sector, so I want to try to think of how I might help you relate to what it feels like to helplessly watch as one thing after another goes red, red, red. And then I thought that the Democrats in the room will be able to resonate with me from the election day and how that feels when things are going down fast and bad. So it's awful, this sinking feeling, right? So we did everything we could to fix things, but at one point it was bad enough that we realized we have to wake the boss up because the boss had to go had a meeting every morning at 7 a.m. with the general, and she would be the one who'd be called on the carpet if the whole signal network was down. And you know, you draw straws on who's gonna go wake up someone at 3 in the morning, and nobody wants to do this, but it was that bad. So we went and woke up General Hicks, and we're standing there in front of this all-red dry erase board and explaining what had happened and discussing our options. And General Hicks, like, she just kind of stood there and took it in, and she understood the gravity of the situation. And she nodded her head, and I was the junior person, right? And she came up to me, and this was the biggest surprise. I was not expecting it. She poked me in the chest really hard, like 4 times, and she goes, "Unfuck this, Lieutenant." And then she did like another tap, like for like the punctuation mark. And I was like, oh goodness, what just happened here? and then she walked out and went back to bed. And I was like, what are you doing? And before you judge her, let me tell you this, she went on to become a 2-star general, and she's beloved by everyone who ever served with her, right? And why did she leave? And I know that it's not that she didn't care, right? It was her on the line the next morning. I don't think it was that she needed her beauty rest, and if she wanted to, I'm absolutely confident she could have said, "Step aside, Lieutenant, I've got this from here," right? Like she knew how to do what we were doing. She could have showed us how to do it. Here's what I think. I think Major General Jan Hicks was more interested in me learning from mistakes and learning how to fix things than she was in her own reputation, in her, in how things looked, right? This was a learning experience. She knew she could buffer for us with the general. We didn't know. We didn't know that. And she was willing to risk her own reputation to give me room to fail and grow. 25 years later, I was driving through Augusta, Georgia, and I looked up General Hicks and I said, can I take you out to lunch? And we had this wonderful reunion, and I told her, I recounted this story for her, and she didn't even remember it. This thing that changed my life. She just howled with laughter like I was telling her something off of a MASH TV show. She's like, that's so funny. You know? And as I reflected, I'm like, well, maybe she just really wanted her beauty sleep, you know? And sometimes that's how things go. It was nothing to her, but it was everything to me, right? And so my guess is for a lot of us in this room, myself included, this goes against all of our pedagogy and all of our training as leaders, that we have to be the ones with the right answer. We like being needed. We like being important. I like being needed. I like being important, right? But leaders who bring in their best out in their people can step back and say, what do you think we should do about that? And not always have the right answer right away. The next generation is raring to go. Look at those Parkland students, right? Did you see that student who was on the national stage in Washington and like threw up and then kept going, right? We just got to get out of their way, right? Right? And the Extinction Rebellion that's happening in the UK right now, like this is phenomenal, right? It's in all of our best interest to take them under our wings, but then give them room to fly. And I think the world could use a whole lot more leaders like General Jan Hicks. And the lesson that I want to share with you, transformational leaders absolutely refuse to micromanage. Never, never, never. Catch yourself doing it. Okay, number 2, transformational leaders redirect attention from the individual to systems and structures. And again, I learned this in the military. I'm astonished many times by how many things I learned in the military that are so relevant to doing social change and social justice work. Fast forward to 1997, and the Army had just opened up some of its special operation units to women, and I was lucky enough to get asked to serve as the first woman commander in a special operations unit. Bravo Company, 112 Signal Battalion, airborne out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Right? That's right. I had 100 soldiers who reported to me, and we provided the communications for Special Forces, Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, others, whoever. We were the comms for special operations. So being the first woman, what was in my mind my first week on the job? I got to be a badass, right? Like I got to just like walk in a room and like kick a garbage can just for the hell of it, right? Right? So. Right? Like that's what you do, right? That's the thing. So my soldiers came up to me the first week and they said, hey man, we've got a problem. Specialist Johnson is coming to formation drunk, so morning PT formation. We have to do something about this. And I knew exactly what we had to do. We had to make an example out of Specialist Johnson because that doesn't happen on Captain Becky's watch, right? So I had the lawyer draw up the paperwork and was all like, yeah, we got to kick out Specialist Johnson, you know. And I didn't have the authority to do it all by myself. I needed my colonel to sign off on this thing. So I made an appointment with the colonel and I went in there all just like big chested and like you remember like Mini-Me in Austin Powers where he's like just going like this? I was like, yeah, I got this, you know. So I say, hey, sir, Specialist Johnson, he's been drunk at formation several times. We need to kick him out, right? Here's the Article 15 paperwork. And he said, he would lean back. I hope I don't show my tummy. He'd lean back in his desk and lean back in his chair and he goes, so Specialist Johnson, what's going on in his life that he does this? And I was like, I don't know, sir. And so he goes, he's already been to drug and alcohol treatment, I see. And I was like, yes, sir, 3 times. He's failed 3 times, you know, and I was all self-righteous. He goes, I tell you what, I'll sign this paperwork, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the drug and alcohol treatment program, and you find out why they didn't fix my soldier. And I was like, okay. I was not expecting that at all. And I went to the Army Drug and Alcohol Treatment Program and like knocked on the door and I was like, why didn't you fix my soldier? He really had a point, right? What's going on with the success rates of our drug and alcohol programs? And why are we putting all the blame on the individuals and not looking at the broader systems and structures and circumstances at play, right? So this lesson I learned when I was maybe 27 years old has stayed with me, has totally stayed with me. And to follow up on the story, we eventually did discharge him out of the military, but it was under much more humane circumstances, and I was much more humble, right? That Colonel Howie Cohen gave me the gift of this insecure, cocky little captain in the Army, the gift of reorienting my attention from people towards systems and structures. And I want to take another moment to appreciate the way that that's happening exactly at this conference as well, right? From the undrawing redlining exhibit, I was just completely captivated by that, to all the sessions that I heard about. We need more conferences like this. I wish there were more conferences like this, committed to shining a spotlight of truth on the real of what's happening out there. So I'm just honored, glad that you all are doing that. Which leads directly into my third point, is transformational leaders tell the truth. So one more story, last military story. 1997, don't ask, don't tell was still the policy in the US military, which meant if you were gay, you weren't supposed to tell anybody. And if you thought someone was gay, you weren't supposed to ask, right? That's sort of what we all lived with for a couple of years. And it may be like really, really obvious, but I'm definitely gay. And so, we were at morning PT where all things seemed to happen, and just kind of like stretching, getting ready to go for a run or something. And I was the company commander, responsible for the lives of America's sons and daughters, and my Lieutenant Eric Hines, came up to me. He's just stretching. He's like, "Hey, Captain K, I just have a question for you." He kind of pulled me aside from everybody, and I was like, "What's up? What's up, Lieutenant Hines?" Like acting all tough, And he goes, "Hey, are you gay?" And this is my inner monologue, just so you know. I was like, if I tell him the truth, I've violated the don't ask, don't tell policy, and I could lose my job, and not only lose my job, but I would feel embarrassed about that, right? Like I was more closeted then. It would have been the worst thing I could have imagined happening. Now, if I tell Eric if I lie to Eric, and he knows I'm lying, or I know I'm lying, then if someday we're in a combat situation and I have to ask Eric to do something that he would be putting his life on the line, why should he trust me? Why should he trust me if I lied to him, right? So I had, in a split second, to weigh this moral dilemma of kind of save my own butt and lie, or tell the truth and risk that, but also do what I felt was the right thing. So fast forward, and my brain is racing, and I go, "Yeah, what about it?" Like that, you know what I mean? And he goes, "I thought so. There's this really cute girl I met the other day, and I think she's gay too." And he wanted to hook me up. And I was like, and then I regained my composure, and I was like, "That's really inappropriate. I'm your commander, And give me her number. And then, so I think I made the right decision in that moment, at that time. But it's not always easy to do that. It's not always easy to do that. And it's entirely possible that you will go forth from here, from this rich conversation about systems and history and justice and injustice and oppression and liberation, and looking at the deeper root causes of what you're up to. It's entirely possible that you will be tempted to speak half-truths when you leave here, right? That you will be tempted to lick the hand that feeds you instead of biting the hand that feeds you, right? And I can relate. I've been here too. The dilemma is real. And in many cases, the people with money and power, they don't want to hear that they have to change, right? But we all know it. Everyone in this room knows that's true, right? I'm reading Winner Takes All right now by Anand, let me say his name right, Gurahadaradas. I think that's how you say it. And I've got to tell you, I am freaking out a little bit. I feel guilty about the times in my own past where I've told half-truths instead of the whole truth, or where I've licked the hand that feeds me. During the 100,000 Homes campaign, we got interviewed by Anderson Cooper for 60 minutes. And again and again and again, he asked me, "Yeah, but do those people deserve housing?" He kept asking it. It was like I went back to my prisoner of war training. It was just, again, I thought I needed to smoke a cigarette or something, right? And I had two answers for him in that, right? That were the right answers by my organizational culture and everything at the time. My first answer was, well, it costs more for us to do nothing as a society than it does to just house everybody. And where I was in my understanding at that time, I was like, right answer, And then he kept pressing, and my second answer was, everyone deserves a second chance. Now, and then he relented a little bit. Now, all I did right then was mostly redirect towards the person deserves a second chance, right? I knew better than this, right? But the other piece of it was I never mentioned redlining. I never mentioned many other things, right, that have been depicted right here in this room right now on that amazing mural out there. I never mentioned the massive reduction in investment in public housing that's happened in our country, right? I never mentioned my mortgage income tax deduction, which is more than a Section 8 voucher probably, right? I didn't mention that. So if I could have a do-over, Anderson would be like, do they deserve housing? And I would be like, I don't know, Anderson, do you deserve your mortgage income tax deduction? You know? Or do I, right? He probably paid cash. But you know what I'm saying. It's hard. It's hard to bite the hand that feeds you, right? I played right into the neoliberal trap that winners take all warns us about, right? Like, look, we have solutions that don't hurt. In fact, they save money, jazz hands, you know, right? And I felt like just doing a little dance, like it's okay, nobody has to change. I know it's not easy to speak truth to power, and I've gotten this wrong myself, and when I know better, I do better. I commit to doing better going forward. And I look back on that conversation with Lieutenant Hines, and I think part of what gave me the courage to tell the truth in that moment was I was thinking about life or death issues. I was like, okay, well, life or death might be on the line, so let me tell the truth here. And I think for me, as I go forward within some of these social justice and racial justice issues, is to remember that these are also matters of life or death. And might that give us more courage to tell full truths to people in power. And we don't have to bite the hand that feeds us, but like we could nibble, nibble a little bit, right? I think that that's a start, right? So transformational leaders tell the truth, always. This next piece is that leaders build consensus towards bold, quantifiable aims. So I see this again and again and again in the social sector, that we have really huge, grandiose aspirations, but we don't put a number and a time to them. And so we keep them in the realm of vagueness. And what that does is it dissipates energy, and you've got all these great ideas leaving here, and then Monday you're going to be on to the first crisis and forget about it, right? And I'm not saying you should do it all by yourself in the car on the way down. This is a consensus process, is really important. But the importance of bold, quantifiable, time-bound aims cannot be overstated. In 2004, Dr. Don Berwick launched a campaign to prevent 100,000 unnecessary deaths in hospitals, the 100,000 Lives campaign, at a time when hospitals were in the top 5 leading causes of death in this country. And this is the quote he used to launch his campaign. It's one of the best, most inspiring examples of a quantifiable time-bound aim I've ever heard. He said, "Here's what I think we should do. I think we should save 100,000 lives. And I think we should do this by June 14th, 2006. 18 months from today. Some is not a number, soon is not a time. Here's the number, 100,000. Here's the time, June 14th, 2006, 9 a.m. This is the next thing he said. He said, and when we do, we will celebrate, starting with pizza and ending with champagne. We will celebrate ourselves because their names can never be known. Our contribution will only be what did not happen to them. And though they are unknown, we will know that mothers and fathers are at graduations and weddings they would have missed, and that grandchildren know grandparents they might not have never known, and holidays will be taken, and work completed, and books read, and symphonies heard, and gardens tended that without our work would only have been a bed of weeds." What Don instigated was incredibly rare in the nonprofit sector. Nobody was willing to risk failure like that at the time. I was living in New York City working on street homelessness on the time that I heard about the 100,000 Lives campaign, and I was so inspired when I heard about it that I thought, we should do the 100,000 Homes campaign, just from hearing about that. And sure enough, my next project became a reality soon after that. 4 years later, 105,000 people were in housing from 186 cities. I guarantee you that would not have happened if we hadn't done the how much by when. So whatever level of scale you're working at, the how much by when, you don't have that, it's just word, 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 right? It moves things from the realm of woulda, coulda, shoulda, to it's on like Donkey Kong, like we are doing this, right? It's a catapult into direct action, and aims form the container within which all of the creativity is unleashed and takes place. But without those aims, it's just too diffuse, it's too much. So some is not a number and soon is not a time. What will be your version of that? Number 5, we're past the halfway mark here. Commitment, leaders commit. I learned about the power of commitment from my mentor, Katie Hendricks, and what she taught me that means is gathering your energy and moving forward in a direction. And it doesn't mean that you don't you don't lose track, and it's the recommitting that's the most essential thing. But what turns quantifiable, bold aims into reality is leaders committing to making those reality and almost living in an imaginary future as if it were real. That's what I do when I am creating change in the world. I'm like, no, this is happening, I'm committing to it. And it's not the Thelma and Louise, like, I'll do it if you do it, and you drive off a cliff and hold hands. This is like, this doesn't need anybody else. This is you and your higher power, whatever that may be. That's what commitment is about. It's what brings it to life. It's what says you mean business. And I'll tell you that when I was doing this, every ounce of my being was committed to 100,000 people being in housing. And when I create new goals or new things now, I commit. That is the thing that turns it on. With the 100,000 Homes campaign, I was so committed that I got a tattoo when the 10,000th person moved into housing. You can show that picture now. So you can see the last zero is missing. So, and there were 90,000 more people who needed to move into housing. So when I would stand up in front of rooms like this and say, well, we're either gonna house 100,000 people or I'll have a lifelong testament to failure. Like that's, and there was one moment, it's a different story for a different time, where we were on track to be the 30,000 Homes campaign. And I was like, you guys, my tattoo. We got to do this, right? You got to get some skin in the game. So commitment is contagious, and it builds commitment in your followers. About halfway through the 100,000 Homes campaign, the people on my team, they were like, Becky doesn't know that this might not happen. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right? Nobody wants to follow somebody who's in it half-ass, right? There's a motto at the CrossFit gym that I don't go to often enough, and it says, don't half-ass anything. Whatever you do, always use your full ass. And I think that captures it. You want to be all in, whatever it is. When you commit, you're stepping into a reality that doesn't exist yet. That's what I think is so wonderful about what all of us are doing. We're creating reality. This is what we're doing. We are creating reality. The commitment is like, it's the open template, right? So I'm not saying you need to get a tattoo to show your commitment, but there is a tattoo station set up outside. So if you're really serious, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't. I'm just kidding, okay. But at least do something tattoo worthy, right? Something you would be willing to put on your body. Leaders commit. 6 and 7 I've put together. So leaders are humble about what they're not good at, and the corollary is leaders liberate people to be their best selves and do their best work. I think this is 90% of it. So long before there was a 100,000 Homes campaign, I was slogging away as the Director of Innovations for MacArthur Genius Award winner, who's an amazing woman. Her name is Roseanne Haggerty. I worked for her for 11 years, and she's a dear friend, right? She hired me to reduce street homelessness in Times Square by 2/3 in 3 years. We got it down by 87% in 4 years. And after that, she said, you're kind of good at startups. Oh, yeah, thank you, yeah. It was a long time ago, yeah. And she said, you're good at startups. You started up a whole program just from scratch. Why don't I put you in charge of all the startups that we have? And I'll pay you some more money. And all I knew about how to do better in the world was like more responsibility, right? That was my model of like, if someone's offering me more responsibility, I seize it, right? So I became the holding place for all of her good ideas that she would have. And then she would hand them off to me, and then my job was to make them reality, just like the work we had done on the streets in Times Square. Now, this is a MacArthur Genius Award winner that has no shortage of good ideas, right? Any of y'all, are you yourselves, or do you know people who email at 2 in the morning? Every day. So you get up and you're like, woo, fresh start, I already have emails, okay. For years, and it was exhilarating. She dragged me along everywhere. This is like who I am today, is because she dragged me everywhere and took me under her wings. But fast forward a couple years, and I had 9 direct reports, and I was getting really burnt out. I had bitten off more than I could chew, and I thought that what my job was to do was to please the boss, right? That's what I thought my job was, versus to get the work done. So then when I'd get those 2 a.m. emails with a good idea, I thought my job was to say, absolutely yes, let's make that happen. Or if she emailed me at 2 a.m. with a question about, hey, is this thing happening? Or I noticed something that was a little off, I felt defensive. And I started getting bitter, and I felt micromanaged, right? And really what was actually going on was I was angry at myself that I didn't think of it first, because perfectionism is also rampant in our society and all this stuff, right? So I started getting just really crispy, right? I don't know if some of you have been there. I'm seeing some nodding heads, right? So every day when I would commute on the Q train from Brooklyn to Manhattan, I would rehearse my quitting conversation in my head. I was probably talking to myself. People were probably wondering if I needed assistance, but my inner monologue was again and again was like, and then she's gonna say this, and then I'm gonna say that, and then she's gonna say this, and then I'm gonna be like, I quit, and I would like be saying this to myself. And then I was fleeing into the future having these conversations. Like again and again and again and again for a long time. So one day she emailed me and she said, hey, let's talk about how things are going. I'm gonna be in Soho. Let's meet at Dean and DeLuca and have some coffee. And like at 2 o'clock or something like that. And going into that meeting, I was absolutely certain of one of two things. She was gonna fire me or I was gonna quit. So at the time I had a BlackBerry back in the day and I was like, I'll be there, like I'll see you there. So we get our coffee and we sit down and my heart is racing, and thankfully, she offered to go first. And she started with something along the lines of like, Becky, you're one of the best leaders I've ever met in my whole life. And I was like, go on. And then she goes, yeah, but you're not a really good manager. And I was like, yeah, I've thought that myself sometimes too, And then she said, and this changed my life, what can we do to free you up so you can lead instead of manage? And if we really freed you up, what would you want to lead? And I mean, what a gift, what a gift. We reorganized the company. I think 5 people got promotions up to 6-figure jobs from taking on projects that I was letting go of, and it cleared the way for me to have the spaciousness out of which the 100,000 Homes campaign grew. That's what I wanted to lead. Her question changed the course of my life, and I hope you can ask others that question as well and pay forward Roseanne's question. But here's another regret that I had. I wish I had had the maturity to approach her proactively and say, not really good at management, this kind of actually sucks for me, but is there another way I can be of service, right? That there's a real humility in being honest about what we're not good at. And those things that we're not good at, when we operate in an individualistic culture, which is very much the culture that many of us are a part of, our broader culture in the United States, things we're not good at are reasons for guilt and shame. They're items for discussion during annual performance reviews, right? Which I'm not a fan of. They're to be hidden and covered up about. In an individualistic culture, the proper response to our weaknesses is this: lie, deny, and make immediate counter-accusations, right? Get that out. And in a more wholesome culture, one that brings out the best everyone, the things that we're not good at, they're simply places where we need other people. They're places where we need our community. And I share this with you because I think this is one of the highest leverage points for going forth and making big change in the world. Noticing what people are great at, noticing what brings people to life, and freeing them up to do that, like Roseanne did for me. It really might be that simple, that there's never any need to blame or criticize or save things up for annual performance reviews, like, oh, I'm gonna really give it to them in March, but freeing people up to do what they love. And there's this other part to it too, of the humility of leaders by creating room for honesty, by modeling that ourselves. I think it takes humongous courage for a leader to admit what they're not good at. So I think when you go back to your next staff meeting, I want to offer a template of just to be like, hi, my name is Larry and I suck at blank, whatever that may be. Right? I think there's huge power in being really honest about what we're not good at. So transformational leaders are honest about their limitations, and they look for ways to liberate the very best in others and free them up to do that work. Number 8, leaders appreciate. What we appreciate appreciates. It grows in value. When we give attention to something, it grows in value. And authentic appreciation is rocket fuel for unleashing your people and the relationships. I don't mean just ending your emails with thanks and an exclamation point. I think that happens a lot. I mean real appreciation, seeing people, noticing people. I noticed you stayed late last night, and I really appreciate your willingness to go above and beyond for this, right? Like whatever that may be. Or like appreciating someone on the dance floor. Like that was beautiful today to see those appreciations of people, the joy and the celebration. The relationships. Large-scale change work, transformation in the world is only relationships. It's only people changing what they think, changing what they do, and that only happens through heart-to-heart connections. And some people think that that's fluffy stuff. I think it's the work. And appreciation is what makes it work. So my team at the 100,000 Homes campaign, I used to hear them calling one another their brother, sister, husband, wives, right? Or sometimes I'd overhear them being like, we would bleed for each other. And I was like, whoa, no, don't do that, right? But we appreciated. We had, when we would go on our semi-annual retreats, we would do an appreciation dinner where we would just sit down to dinner together and one person would popcorn an appreciation for someone else. Tears, hours of appreciations. It was built into the day-to-day as well, but these appreciation dinners were the glue that held us together. So I'll just share one quick warning of don't do what I did here. So I had the best kindergarten teacher in the world. Her name was Mrs. Moncher. I loved her. Did any of you else have great kindergarten teachers? They're amazing, right? I remember going to her one day and I was done my work and I was like, Mrs. Moncher, I'm done my work. What should I do? And she was like, you could give me a hug. And I was like, oh, that's the best. And like a Mrs. Moncher hug was like the best hug in the world, right? And I wasn't the only one. So fast forward 30 years later, I'm in New York City. I'm at the LGBT parade, the gay parade. I'm in Union Square. And I met a guy who had gone to the Air Force Academy, and he was gay too, and we're at brunch, because that's what gay people do. And we're just making conversation. And he goes, where'd you grow up? And I was like, I was in Phoenix. I grew up in Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona. He goes, oh my God, me too. And he goes, where'd you go to school? And I said, oh, it's this small Catholic school. It's called St. Teresa's. And he looked at me and he goes, Mrs. Moncher? We both said it at the same time, and we started crying. We was like, that's the kind of teacher Mrs. Moncher was, right? And for many years, I would Google Betty Moncher. And I never found her. I don't think she was up on the internet, right? Until 2 years ago, I emailed her, I Googled Betty Moncher, and she did pop up, but it was her obituary. And I had missed the chance to tell her thank you, right? And I will regret that forever. So never, ever miss an opportunity to appreciate someone, preferably before they die. Don't die, but appreciate, right? So here's what I want to ask you to do today, everybody in this audience, is right now think of somebody that you appreciate, whether it's a teammate, a colleague, someone who put on this conference, your kindergarten teacher, your significant other, whoever it may be, a mentor who has challenged you. Larry, you've been wonderful, right? Whoever it may be, right? And commit to appreciating that person before the sun goes down. A text, a phone call, out of the blue. In my trainings at the end, I say, who helped you be here this week? Okay, stop everything and text, write an appreciation to them right now, right? And give them 5 minutes to do that. Take the time to do that. Transformational leaders appreciate, and what you appreciate appreciates. I want to appreciate Jan Hicks, Howie Cohen, Eric Hines, Don Berwick, Katie Hendricks, Roseanne Hegarty, and Mrs. Moncher for being the kind of leaders that I would follow anywhere and for helping me become the person I am today. And I want to appreciate everyone in this room for your very generous attention. You've been very kind as I hold you back from the raffle. I hope that something I said resonates with you and is something that you can carry forward in your own way, in your own work, to help yourself and your people do the important work that you're doing. I hope that Larry listens to you when you tell him about number 6 and how he needs to really work on that. And I'll do a quick David Letterman style recap here from 8 to 1. So 8, what you appreciate appreciates. 7, liberate people to do what they love. 6, if you suck, say you suck. 5, put some skin in the game and commit to doing something tattoo worthy. 4, some is not a number, soon is not a time. 3, nibble the hand that feeds you, speak full truth to power. 2, redirect attention from individuals back to systems and structures. And as General Hicks said to me, and I now pass along to you, consider each of you being poked really hard in the chest by like a middle-aged, little bit chubby lesbian saying like, unfuck this. There's some really, I'm gonna give that to you. Go get it, right? Maybe, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. All right. So we'll do the.
They'll come with it. Okay. They'll come get it.
Okay. What do I say here?
So since I could not stop laughing, thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm really curious. This week, we have been talking a lot about systems and structures and historical and current day inequities. We've also gotten a chance to hear the stories of lots of different people who have lived experience. We've got to hear about some of the great solutions that are taking place across Colorado. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And as you talked about transformational leadership, you definitely just modeled to us through your speech laughter. So I'm really curious is around how do you think about laughter in its role as we try to get things done?
Appreciate the question, thank you. And I would, may I reframe that to joy? Because I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. If any of you are familiar with the Enneagram, my life is oriented around avoiding pain. So, therefore, I can be kind of fun, but it can be, when it's superficial, it can be like whoopee cushion fun and clowns on the bus fun. But underneath that, when we're able to really be with the sorrow and the suffering and the change that needs to happen, there's a different level that takes a place of a, yes, I see all this, I feel all this, my heart is open, and this is life, and I'm all in it, and I'm still here, and I can do something about it, and there's joy that flows through that's essential. I think that the joy is so important, and the laughter just comes from where there's joy in the work. And it's hard to have joy in the work when it's so painful, right? And yet, when we're doing something about it together, that actually is one of the most joyful things you can do.
So you started your talk talking about that feeling you get in your bones. And I know all of us have probably had that feeling this entire week, but we feel it all the time. What's your advice to us about what to do with that feeling sometimes that we have in our bones as we think about finding common ground and trying to get things done?
So how do you take action on what you know to be true in your bones?
Yeah.
So what's coming to mind, I love the improvness of this, the improvisation of this conversation. My framework for this is integrity. So, and we teach this, and we have a fellowship, and this is the foundation of the fellowship. And it's this almost like a wheel of when I'm in integrity, when I'm in my wholeness, when I'm all here, when I'm all present, that's when the change is able to happen. And so it doesn't have to be big or out there. It can be right here. It can be inside, right? And the framework for integrity, this is an adaptation from something I also learned from Katie Hendricks, is noticing. Am I noticing things? What am I not seeing? Experiencing, am I allowing myself and my body to fully experience what's happening? We can't leave our bodies at home, or we have to bring our bodies to work with us. Am I expressing what's true? Is there a gap between my experience and my expression where I'm packaging things because that wouldn't be appropriate, or I'm just blah, 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 to avoid experiencing? And then the last piece is the taking action, but that comes last. After the noticing, experiencing, expressing then what's aligned, integrity-full presence to action. And those kinds of actions can be really little things that make really big openings. That's a very abstract answer. I apologize.
That's
but
great. Well, I think part of it is, right, we all want to take action immediately. Something happens, we see it, we want to respond. And so how have you been able really kind of to fully experience and think about what are the steps and to go fast enough, but also slow enough at the same time?
You're hitting right on such a dilemma, right? So one of the things in my learning about racial justice and equity, for example, which is far from complete, but often what people will say to me is, you need to sit in your discomfort. And I'm like, you don't know who you're talking to. like, this is hard. This is really hard. So especially for myself, I'll speak as a white person, the impulse to rush to action to fix things can be misguided, right? I understand that. So I don't have an easy answer for that. But other than there's something about, for me, sitting in the discomfort to allow myself to feel that all the way through to completion. And then look around for who else is here. Like, it's in community where that action, I think, is the most powerful, where it's organic and emergent and with and from the community, in community. That would be, for me, that's the best. When I try to go do it by myself, which I'm very guilty of, it's often a miss.
So this week we've really been trying to build more community here amongst us. And as you think about what you said earlier around, I hope some folks found those co-conspirators. What would you tell us about making sure that we follow through with those co-conspirators to really think about big solutions and getting things done?
Yeah, well, that can be just a commitment that I commit to follow up with them, before I go home today, to send the email if you have someone's card. If you think they're attractive, ask them if they want to make out, before you go. But taking action, so I call that closing the gap. Closing the gap. So this is sort of maybe slightly contradictory to the last thing I said, but if there's a clear action that you want to take, don't procrastinate, just do it right now, be done with it. So then therefore what that does is more of your being is freed up to be in full contact presence with people, which is where the real change happens. So yeah, don't do it, don't leave this room until you've emailed somebody hey, let's really do this. The one or two, don't overwhelm yourself, but the 1 or 2, 3 people, yeah.
So you gave us your 8 provocations for transformational leadership. I'm wondering if you could just share with us more about what your philosophy is around leadership, and especially leadership as we are working around, again, this tough work, right? Social justice work, really thinking about equity, thinking about housing and health being a human right, housing being a human right. How do you think about leadership and leading in these times that we're in?
Yeah, that's evolved. My thinking on leadership has evolved a lot. I'm 50 years old this year, and I'm the oldest of 7 kids. So in a way, I've been groomed to be a leadership since my first sibling was born, of responsible for others and in those ways. And when I went to West Point, I think they defined leadership as getting people to do things they don't want to do, which is not how I think. And I think West Point has progressed, but I don't think it's at all about manipulation or getting anybody to do anything they don't want to do. I think it's about tapping into the things that we want to do and getting on with doing them. My favorite definition that I have now, I learned from the National Equity Project, which is simply taking responsibility for what matters to you. So taking that responsibility, and I kind of mash that up. One of my lifelong qualms or questions is, how do I take 100% responsibility for the whole, for things that are out there that I didn't cause, I didn't create, they're not my fault, but they're really complex and messed up, and I'm participating in them, and I'm part of it, and it can be really overwhelming. But to show up in 100% responsibility for myself, knowing that even the notion that me being a separate being, is a lie, that you and I we're inextricably linked, right, of linked fate. So leadership for me is taking responsibility for what matters, showing up fully myself, and never forgetting for a second that there's no separate me. There's us, right? And leaves and trees and birds, and it's just we're all linked. Never forgetting that is, from my definition, what leadership is.
So this morning during our conversation, we were talking a lot about listening and really listening with the intent to hear, not the intent to act or have a solution. How do you think about that as you think about transformational leadership and our responsibility to listen?
It is everything. It is everything. And the reason why we were able to do what we did on Times Square was we spent a couple months just sitting on the urinaceous streets of New York City asking people, hey, what do you want? Nobody ever did that. They just assumed that if they wanted something, they would go into shelter and called them service resistant. So all my training and indoctrination was founded on homelessness, and what I understand was formed on listening. And even still, you can't listen enough, right? I think it's resisting the impulse to go in and try to rescue something or fix someone, and instead sitting alongside and showing up in solidarity and believing fully that people are capable of solving their own problems if we go together, go fix these systems and structures together. That, I think, you can't do that without the listening, and there's not anywhere near enough about it. So we just launched a podcast. It's called Unleashing Social Change, and I interview people who are working on polarization. They said all the people in the world who are working on genocide and civil war, who were in Rwanda and Yugoslavia, they've all come back to the US because this is where the problem is now. And and I'm like, well, what do you do, right? Because I've got my opinions. There's people I want to shut down on the other side of the political aisle. And the answer, there's 2 separate interviews with people, the answer is listening. And that listening is the magic key. And I'm like, yeah, but what if they're wrong? Which, and they're like, no, they need to be heard, even if they're wrong. And I'm like, oh, but it's hard, and it's hard.
Yeah. So, this is the closing session of the conference. What would you share with us as we've been together in community, really trying to listen to one another. We've got a lot of facts, right? We've heard some stories. We're leaving here, and this theme is around, again, getting things done. What would you want every person who has participated this week or watched us on the live stream to really understand about getting things done?
What it all comes down for me is you can make a difference. And it sounds so cliche, but each person is here to do something. I couldn't begin to guess what that may be, but in one of the Gnostic Gospels, which I guess don't count, but I think they're the good ones. The Gospel of Thomas says, if you don't do what is within you, if you don't express what is within you, it will kill you. And if you do, it will set you free, something to that effect. And so I think for each person, getting clear on what is it within me that's a calling, that's not coming from a place of guilt or shame, that really is a true, authentic calling, and then clear up everything and get on with it, right? That's what will set us all free, is if each of us is expressing that with no reservations.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Becky.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, that was fun.
So Becky, we appreciate you, and you are a badass. So I didn't have a General Hicks, but I had Pat McDonald. I was a 25-year-old, freshly minted master's degree, first year teacher. It's like mid-October. I'm packing up for the day. Mr. Roy, the custodian, comes in. He's sweeping up the room, and I'm, hey, Mr. Roy, how you doing? And he says, Karen, you have a great way with the kids. It's clear you really care about them and that you respect them, but you got to slow down. You are going way too fast. So I go marching into the principal's office. Mr. Roy just critiqued my teaching. And she just leaned back in her chair and looked up at me, and she said, and what did he say? I said, well, he said I had a good way with the kids, but I needed to slow down. And she just put her head down and started writing again. And in that moment, with that one sentence, she completely changed how I viewed what an expert looked like. Because when I really stopped to think about it, Mr. Roy had been in that building for 30 years. He'd seen more good and bad teaching than anybody else. Teachers don't get to see each other teach. He had seen good teaching and bad teaching. And at that moment, I realized, well, number one, he was right. But then Mr. Roy became the expert. He became my mentor. I would go to him when I had problems with Susie. And he would say, well, I've seen it done these different ways. So it was that one sentence, and it completely changed my life about how I viewed feedback, where I think it can come from, and who an expert can look like. So I understand that the power of the one sentence that somebody gives you that just stops you in your tracks and reorients your thinking. So I thank Pat McDonald. And like you with General Hicks, years later, she and I are great friends. I recounted the story to her. She had no idea. She didn't remember it, not at all. But it was life-changing for me. So Thank you for reminding me of Pat McDonald, and I'm going to call her tonight. Now, Becky doesn't know this, but in Colorado, raffle has a very specific legal meaning. This is not a raffle. This is a drawing. So 2 last pieces of business. First, let's put up the slide with the dates for next year's symposium, so you can go ahead and put those in your calendar. Last week in July, July 29th through 31st next year. So mark that calendar. And now for the drawing for $10,000 donation to the nonprofit of your choice. Let's see here. How about Janet McIntyre? For Earthlinks. Yes, yes. See, all of y'all are like, yay, Janet. All right, and lastly, Robin Wolf. Is Robin here? Oh, she left. Oh, y'all are like, yay, Robin! Yay, Robin! Yeah, somebody that knows her, tell her. All right, now how about Alicia Howard? Congratulations. So between now and next year, if you can't unfuck it, don't fuck it up worse. See you next year.